Europe builds public transit and housing, for example, at a fraction of the cost that we build and has much stronger and better paid unions. So I think there are better ways to explain the cost overruns on American projects than just blaming unions.
Lee Harris is a staff writer at the American Prospect. In 2020, she co-founded New York Focus, which is an investigative news site on New York politics. Prior to that, she was editor of the independent newspaper at the University of Chicago. Lee, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us here on the Valley Labor Report.
Thanks for having me on. I'm a big fan.
Oh, well, very good. I'm a big fan of the work that you do over at the American Prospect. The American Prospect is definitely, one of the better places for national news. I like what I see out of there.
Yeah, if you're interested in a magazine, this should be on your short list. Like you should check out that publication. They're putting out great work every week. Seriously.
Yeah. So you have a piece that. And we've been tracking some of this, but you did a really good job of highlighting a local story that shows exactly what this is meaning in on the ground. And that story is about the lack of protections and the lack of enforcement in the CHIPS Act in particular, but also the Inflation Reduction Act. And I think that lack of protections actually made Bernie Sanders one of the lone votes against the CHIPS Act. Is that right?
I think that's right. Yep. And maybe to go a little, well, go ahead.
No, you go.
Maybe I'll give a little background on why I got into this story to begin with. So my story looks at the new TSMC chips facility that's being built in Phoenix. And to give, before we get into the labor politics of it, just some background on what's going on. This is the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC, which is building a huge, what they call a fab, a chips factory in Phoenix. And context is the US obviously wants to onshore manufacturing of computer chips, these really crucial parts to basically all electronics. And TSMC is based in Taiwan, and it's super worried that China could prevent it from producing or exporting chips in a future military conflict or blockade. So this is seen as a key kind of national security project. And the campus that they're building is enormous. It's almost 2 miles by 1 mile, the entire campus. There are going to be several fabs there. And it's a $40 billion development that's expected to get a pretty big cash infusion from the CHIPS Act. And it's being built in Phoenix on top of already a really hot construction labor market between residential construction and then also some new building from the Inflation Reduction Act, including a lithium battery plant. So I kind of thought, okay, Arizona's an old right-to-work state. How are creative labor leaders taking advantage of those conditions to build up union density in a place where it's been really decimated? And in my view, they should be able to, since taxpayer money is being spent on these programs. And Biden's advertising them as, creating good union jobs. That's his line at every speech that he gives at every ribbon cutting about these new projects. So I was really shocked when I talked to Aaron Butler, who's president of the Building Trades Council down in Arizona, and a couple other labor leaders who said, yeah, this should be a moment for huge investment in apprenticeship programs and workforce training. But unions are facing a lot of uncertainty about whether they'll even be asked to be on these projects because they've talked to TSMC. TSMC has, first of all, refused a project labor agreement, but also has been pretty cold and anti-union in their dealings with the building trades, which again has surprised them simply because it's been hard to get enough workers to staff projects of these size. So unions feel like they should be brought in as partners on these projects. So I'll pause there, but I think what I really want to get into is the conditions out at the plant itself, because not only, there's obviously a kind of like moral case for why they should be using union labor, but I was struck by the fact that it seems like the conditions are tough enough that the project's actually being delayed by the fact that they're using pretty inexperienced non-union subcontractors who have made pretty elementary mistakes.
Wow. Yeah. And you know, just to emphasize that, you mentioned in your speech, in your article, that actually Biden's sales pitch at this fab emphasized the importance of, quote, hiring union folks. So he's actually like at this site, you know, where we're talking about, oh, they're not using union labor, talking about the importance of hiring union people to do this. And you know, the importance of hiring union folks. You know, you mentioned that there's a moral dimension to that, of like, we want people who, in particular, when we're investing as a public, we want to be kind of a model employer, right? We want to set the standard for the private industry in terms of wages, benefits, and working conditions, instead of our tax dollars funneling and driving a race to the bottom among construction workers. But also there is actually a real practical, you know, small c conservative case for using union labor, and in that actually when you use union labor with their experienced journeymen, their long apprenticeship programs, you're going to get better quality work. You're going to finish on time. You're going to finish on or under budget. And you're saying that's not happening here.
That's right. So, and this is from speaking to workers on the job right now, some of whom didn't want to be identified, but also to labor leaders in the region who did. They are relying on pretty much anyone they can get at this point, because there is this, because it's just an enormous project, but that includes a bunch of non-union subcontractors. And for that reason, there have been a number of really ugly injuries, safety shortcuts described to me, and then, mistakes that have just slowed down the project. So to give you a couple examples, I've heard from a couple of folks about a really grisly injury in which there was a worker who was grinding with an 8-inch grinder on pipe, and he removed the guard. The grinder got away from him, and his thigh got cut down all the way down to the bone, in a really horrible injury. In another case, a 20-inch piece of carbon steel was dropped off a crane and broke a guy's femur. And to give an example of the way in which mistakes can slow down projects, there's a non-union subcontractor on site that's now pretty notorious that I was told was pressure testing 72-inch pipe that they had installed. So like really big pipe that you can stand up in. They're testing it. They go to drain the pipe and they forget to vent it. So 110 feet of this enormous piping collapsed, collapsed in itself and destroyed the structural supports. And this required a lot of backpedaling, and it delayed the delivery of that project. And now if you ask union workers, they'll say that's first year apprentice stuff. You learn very early on that if you're draining big piping, you have to vent it so that you don't create a low pressure area. But that's the kind of thing that is a real setback if you're using inexperienced, untrained workers. And that's how unions are making the case for themselves on this site.
Do you have an idea of how long it set the project back, or how much money that mistake cost?
No, I wish I knew. It's tough to get. I should actually ask for an estimate. But no, I think there are, beyond those kinds of specific errors, though, it seems like there are more general kind of coordination problems between a lot of the subcontractors working on this site. And I get, so to put this in wider political context, I think it's kind of ironic that that the site is having these problems, because we hear all the time about I think the main criticism of the CHIPS Act has been, or a big one has been from liberals, I mean from a certain segment of Democrats, has been chips are a national security concern. We need to stand up these facilities as quickly as possible. And labor and environmentalists and people who want kind of special things attached, special regulations attached to these plants are just slowing them down.
I mean, including Ezra Klein. You mentioned Ezra Klein in your piece as one of these people that's like, oh, I don't know, maybe the American worker has it too good. Maybe it's kind of
Right, exactly. There's this whole meme out there that labor is way too powerful in the United States, and unions, with all of their political clout that they're throwing around, are going to slow down these projects. And what was surprising to me is that one of their main critiques has been that the Biden administration has written all of these requirements into the laws, requirements to use union workers or to provide childcare in order to get female workers on the job. Now, we can debate whether or not it would be a good idea to include those requirements. I personally think there's a good case for it. But the fact of the matter is the law didn't write in those requirements. The way it's structured is the Commerce Department says, we're offering ultimately be billions in dollars in subsidies for these types of projects. You come to us and tell us what your labor plans are. So they do request a plan. They say, tell us your workforce development plan, tell us if you're planning on using a project labor agreement, and tell us, by the way, if there's childcare facilities, affordable childcare facilities near the project site that you're planning on, because we think that makes it easier for female construction workers to participate on the site. But it doesn't require any of those things. It asks companies to tell them what they're doing and takes it into consideration. So they're like nice to haves. They're by no means requirements that are going to hold up projects for companies that decide not to do them.
That's just wild. That's and this and these complaints, I know Ezra Klein, and there's some, it's not to say that he hasn't done any good work, but his the thing that he puts out is like, I'm like a numbers guy, right? I'm like a facts and figures and numbers guy. And so the idea that he would put forward that, there are all these onerous regulations when that's just flatly not true is really wild to me. And then it gets published in the New York Times.
And I think to zoom out a little bit from this one project in Phoenix, the bigger critique by Ezra Klein, who I think, by the way, is a really smart kind of critic, and broadly thinks of himself as being on the left and an interesting guy. But he and others, their critique has been basically, why is it so hard to build things in America? Why is it so costly to build a mile of public transit? Why does it take so long to get, housing built in big cities? And I think there's a grain of truth to that. Like it is really expensive to build all sorts of public infrastructure in the U.S. And he's raising really smart questions about why building can be slow and tough, and there are all these roadblocks. But I think it's misleading to lay all the blame at the feet of, number one, unions, and then also environmentalists and other people who want review of projects. Partly because, just thinking about labor, Europe builds public transit and housing, for example, at a fraction of the cost that we build in the US, and has much stronger and better paid unions,
right?
And also much denser cities. So I think there are better ways to explain the cost overruns on American projects than just blaming unions.
Especially when unions aren't actually the ones doing most of the construction. Like unions are just simply, like in this project, unions by and large are just simply not present. There's some unions have been able to place some people, but by and large, the TSMC fabs are being constructed by non-union firms. And one of the things that you mentioned was that there are mistakes that are causing project delays. And we actually saw that just down the street here in Decatur. The United Launch Alliance, they build rockets for, sending payloads to the International Space Station here in Decatur, and they are doing an expansion, and the president, or the former president of the union for the machinists there, tried to get ULA to at least allow our local union construction trade unions to bid on the project. Just allow them to bid, just see what it would cost. And ULA wasn't interested. They hired some out-of-state non-union contractor, and they put up the frame of the thing, the steel frames, and then a big windstorm came the other day and it blew the whole thing down. And so now they're having to start over. And it's like, and so the iron workers, took a picture of it and did a little victory lap on Facebook saying, oh, this is what you get. But so it's just, it's really, but it is, it's a disappointing thing to see that kind of stuff. That's money wasted, time wasted,
Yeah. I was going to mention that it's not all doom and gloom. I think there are positive signs on the horizon in some of these jobs that are being created. LIUNA, the laborers union, is building a new $6.5 million training center outside Phoenix. Just even though they haven't, they would have loved to have a project labor agreement or a couple, giving them more certainty that once they train up these workers, the jobs are going to be available. But they have decided they think it's going to be a hot labor market for the next several years in that region, and they want union laborers to be competitive, which I think is really exciting. And we're going to see similar moves from other unions. And I think in general, the scale of investments we're seeing are just, even if companies fight them the entire way, ultimately, there's really high demand for a lot of labor in these regions. And so unions are going to end up taking some of those jobs and using that as a foothold.
And they have been able to win some votes at the Phoenix City Council, right?
Right, exactly. So they had this kind of surprise victory, which is in which the city council, the progressive members of the city council, and then the one most right-wing member, kind of surprisingly sided with them on a vote to raise the pay for workers on city construction jobs to prevailing wages in the region. So this gives unions that pay prevailing wage a much fairer bite at these city construction jobs. And I think Phoenix did that, and several other cities in Arizona, Tucson and others, are now considering similar prevailing wage ordinances. So we could see a whole wave of those kinds of rulings, and it matters a lot. I mean, this just applies to city funded development, and it doesn't apply to residential construction, but it's federal, it's municipal building projects. But Phoenix has grown so quickly over the past couple of years, and there's so much backfill and sewage and other infrastructure, water treatment, streets. Like there's so much city construction work to be done because of that recent growth, that unions are really, really bullish on the next 5 or 6 years, and now they're going to be, receiving fair wages over that period.
Yeah, that'll be great. And so, with they obviously have some amount of support and relationships with local politicians. Is there any reason to believe that maybe over the next year or so they'll be able to make some headway with TSMC on this construction site, or are they mostly just setting their sights on, city construction and maybe trying to get a foothold in residential construction and writing off TSMC as a lost cause?
No, I think they're really going to be fighting for more jobs at TSMC, given the scale of the project and the fact that it's likely to receive huge taxpayer funding. And I think the Biden administration and federal politicians have way more sway here than you might think, given that this is their baby. Like they passed legislation aimed at standing up a couple of fabs at Intel Micron, TSMC. There's a handful of companies. The Biden administration has spent many hours in the room with the executives at these companies. If there's enough pressure from labor, and if the administration makes it a priority, it seems to me they can easily negotiate those conditions. So it's a matter of sort of unions keeping up pressure and the Biden administration hearing that pressure and delivering the union jobs that they keep promising.
From your lips to God's ears, Lee Harris, staff writer at the American Prospect. Is there anything else that you think folks ought to know about this story before we let you go?
I think we covered it. The one other thing I'd say is that I'm super interested in this question of whether the administration is actually delivering the union jobs that they're promising. So I'm always looking to talk to workers, especially in the South, about the kinds of conditions they're seeing. So hit me up at lharris@prospect.org, or my phone number, which is on my site at the Prospect website. And I'd love to hear what people are kind of seeing on the ground.
And you can follow her on Twitter at Lee_Harris with 3 E's, LEEE_Harris on Twitter.com.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Appreciate
Bye-bye.
it. All right, folks. Like I said, that was Lee Harris, staff writer at the American Prospect. Check out her work. Really great. And the publication is great as well. Yeah,
absolutely. Very glad to follow them every week. I get their emails in my inbox, and there's always, great reporting coming out.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project. And you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.